Yeah, so again, a little introduction to what am I going to talk about? Um, just a tiny bit of background and context, like why do we think it makes sense to talk about sense and sense making? Um, then we will talk about sense making, surprisingly. Talk a bit about the format that we came up with, and in the end, ask some guiding questions that we can go through today. And to go a bit into context, many have probably heard the term VUCA, which is an acronym standing for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that is a good characterization of the world that we are currently living in. So it's very fast paced, high intensity, lots of novelty. So it's quite hard to predict what comes next. And the longer time periods we're trying to predict, the harder it gets. Another characteristic of our times is that we're really living in an age of transformation and crisis. So many systems are in a state of crisis, and we can see that on an ecological level, on a psychological level, on a social level, and also on a spiritual level. And the thing is that we're really getting our planet and us to reach some boundaries, and especially when considering existential risk, of which there are many. So here I just noted, biotech, nanotech, artificial intelligence, and of course nuclear threats. And since those things exist, and it's the first time that we can actually destroy ourselves and life on this planet, which means that these problems we can't solve by ourselves, like not one person, not one country. So what we really need is global coordination and cooperation. Without that, these existential risks will be very, very hard to mitigate. So we can also see our current situation as being at a crossroads. So we can either go down this path of destruction and dystopia, or we can go down this path towards utopia and maybe regeneration. And the thing is that we are quite capable of that. So it's not really lacking in innovation or in knowledge, but maybe it's lacking a bit in wisdom. So we can ask ourselves the question, what is really important to go down towards utopia? So how can we choose this path? And one thing that is mentioned again and again in some communities that I like is that in order to go down that path, we really have to increase our capacity for sense making. So for understanding the world, for choice making. So what decisions do we make based on this sense making? And then collective action. And sense making today, I really like this statement from Daniel Schmachtenberger, who says, if we're trying to make sense of the world today, it really feels like running increasingly fast through an increasingly dark forest. So there's more and more information, there's more and more stuff that we could process, and it's going faster and faster. So if you've ever run through a dark forest, chances are you're going to get hurt. So given this situation that it's really, really hard to sense make nowadays, the question is, okay, how can we do that? And that's kind of why we came up with this format of how do we sense make? Let's try, let's experiment with it. And it's especially important in this age of polarization. Like the last 10 years have shown us what social media can do to us and to democracy. If you maximize time on site and engagement, then you'll end up with a population that's completely polarized. Problem is, things might get worse. Since last year, we've seen the advent of large language models, of ChatGPT, of comparable systems. So now everybody has the technology at their fingertips to flood us with good information, but also with bullshit and spam and all other kinds of things. So it's really becoming more and more important how we can distinguish truth from untruth. There might be another word for that. And the question is, how can we do that systematically and collectively? There's another thing that I think is worth mentioning is that we're living in an age of special interests. So there's many corporate interests which are not necessarily our interests as human beings or as life on this planet, but very special corporate interests. So it's another reason why it's very important for us to come together and to agree, or to find out what we actually agree on. And why I'm pretty hopeful is that I think we agree on more than we actually think. So just put this slide, the hierarchy of needs from Maslow, where we're very clear, our physiological needs. We all want clean water. We all want shelter. We all actually want safety. We all want love and belonging. I feel that sometimes there is a lack of making agreements visible. And I remember 2003, that was an image of the demonstrations against the Iraq War. And it was huge. Like everybody in Berlin was demonstrating. And then when we watched the news at the end of the day, we saw all over the world people demonstrated. Not much happened because of those demonstrations. They still went ahead with this stupid war. But it's so amazing to see, everybody else has the same belief. Everybody else thinks this is crazy. And you only see that when you make the agreements visible. In this case, going to the street and demonstrating together, but maybe there are other ways of making agreements visible. And my wish, maybe naive, is that we just see all the agreements that we have, that we can just do, like, make better choices and have not more space for collective action. And one goal of this is really to create little islands of coherence. And there's a really lovely quote from Ilya Prigogine, who says, when a complex system is very unstable, small islands of coherence can transform the entire system. And I do feel we are in a very unstable system. So it really needs small islands of coherence. And also the question, what if we could not only repeatedly create islands of coherence, but deeply connect them, creating large-scale cohesion? And that brings us to a couple of questions around sense-making. So one really is, what modalities can and should we use? Today, we're going to use certain modalities which are like quite cognitive. Of course, they involve emotions, but there's many other modalities like constellation work, which involves much more the body and sort of an intuitive sense. Exactly. How can we engage all our systems? How can we scale it? And another question that comes from my thinking about like micro solidarity, like what things should we do on what scale, and what scale is good for what? A question I've been interested for a long time: what's actually the path from collective agreement to policy? Because the way policy is done right now is very much dominated by special interest groups, by lobbying, etc. So how can we actually create such a force of agreements and make them visible that you can only make those into policy? And yeah, I think it's really a question of running many different experiments in parallel. So also seeing this as one experiment, but there's many others that people are already running. And finally, what role can AI play in collective sense making? One thing AI is really good at is keeping a lot of complex information in their system. So understanding it and keeping it alive so they can actually make choices based on this complexity, which for us humans with these biological brains is very, very hard. So a question could also be, how can AI help us get out of polarization, like analyzing agreement spaces and then seeing what is in between? How could these groups slowly and systematically grow a bit together rather than polarize the groups more, that what social media does a lot. And so, I already shared this ideal at the beginning, to really here have an environment that is high on psychological safety and on trust and honesty. Yes, also here we have a couple of formats that we're going to do today. This is more like a general ideal of seeing us as citizen scientists, or this whole thing as a participatory action research, which basically says you create something, you run it, you analyze it, you optimize it. So it's really action that is in the forefront, and also states that if I'm a scientist, I'm not just an observer, but I'm actively participating in it. That's my ideal research, or my research ideal for many, many projects. And also making the process meaningful and fun. Yes, so talking about this first experiment, just checking the time, but I think we're good on time. So today we thought it would be interesting to combine different modalities. One is really self-reflection. And the question here is, what do I believe without any immediate input from the outside? Because we are very easily biased and manipulated, and peer pressure is a very strong thing. So can we really go into ourselves and see, what do I actually believe? Then we also combine this with small group deliberation. So the question is, what do we come up with as a group of 3? So today our small groups will be groups of 3. And then we go into Polis. Polis is a research or a platform that can surface agreements, and we'll share a little bit more later on about this. Another interest is how can we not start discussions again and again from scratch, but how can we actually create outcomes or agreement spaces that we can then build on? And so in this case, Polis is the weapon of choice, I would say, which where you can really see agreement spaces. You can see statements that many people agree on. And so what we will share is this input video. We'll share the Polis report, which shows like how the conversation went. And also what is interesting about Polis, we can create this agreement space in this little group. We're like 20 people, but then you can share it to as many people as you want. So you can actually scale conversations, which is really nice. And Polis is a super interesting piece of software which has been used in many different cases, most famously in Taiwan in the digital democracy movement and Gov0. And I will share actually as a link a really nice talk by Audrey Tang, who's the first digital minister of Taiwan. It was just mind-blowingly amazing on these topics. Yeah. Okay, which brings us to today's topic. So we thought, let's try this. And what could we try this with? One thing I think is really important when we look at this landscape of issues is our collective attention and where do we put it. So we thought to start, we had a discussion, Ilya, I mean, what topic should we start with, and then we got, no, let's not start with the topic, but let's use the process and the community in order to surface the topics that we are really interested in. So what do we as a little collective want to focus on? What do we find meaningful? What do we find impactful? And so we have 2 guiding questions for today, and they are exactly that. What issues feel most meaningful to discuss in this space? Another one, what issues, if they were adequately addressed, would have the most positive impact on our current global situation? And these guiding questions are just a starting point for finding out what we want to discuss. I can share 2 more words about Polis. So what we're going to do is we're going to go first into self-reflection on these guiding questions. Then we go into small group deliberation. And then we can write statements on Polis. So when you open Polis, we'll give you a link. You see something like this. And there's this conversation with a topic. And here you can create statements. It's probably in English on your screen. So you can create a statement here and then submit it. This statement then comes to us. We have to approve it. And sometimes we'll throw out doubles. Like if many people say, oh, we should address climate change, and this is the 4th time it's mentioned, we just put 1 so that you can see just one. You want to see that topic only once. So you add your statements in your small group. What comes then afterwards, you'll see something like this, where you're shown certain statements. Like this is just an example. And you can either click agree or disagree or pass. And what we come out with is something like this and many more variables where you actually see who agreed with what. And Polis, there is a little machine learning algorithm behind Polis, which basically also surfaces the things that have already a lot of agreement, shows them more. So basically it just goes more and more into agreement.